And we're back here in the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely. And once again, I am joined, thankfully, by a very good friend of the show and becoming more and more co host than special guest, Brandon Witchert from Software Defined Talk. Brandon, welcome back to the show, man.
Thank you very much. We survived the incredible Spectrum outage where the entire internet went down for the state of Texas, but we're back. We've changed out the internet, and we're excited to be here to talk about all of your questions, which will be fun.
Yeah, we were scheduled to record this last week. I had to drop out, and then you had to drop out. Aaron's now had to drop out. It's good that we have anybody making this show. We're going to cover, as we often do in the middle of the year when there's less things to talk about. We do have lots of questions from the audience that we try and get to. So we're going to do one big mailbag show today. Before we get to that, man, any hot takes on anything else, sports related, society, news and entertainment, culture before we dive into it?
Well, I appreciate the Euros kind of giving us a little bit of soccer, as we say here in the United States, football for the rest of the world. It was fun. We got into it. Everyone got into watching the Euros. Congratulations to Spain, all of our listeners in Spain. I'm sure that was a huge win. So, yeah, so it was great. I appreciate that because there was like literally nothing on. So I was like, all right, let's boot up the soccer. Let's get figured out. And I thought it was better than the North and South America, better than the Copa. I got more into the European one than I did to the North and South American version, which was fun.
Yeah, the European one was, two mainstay powerhouses, and once again, unfortunately, for the English, they lost again. They're like the lovable loser of all this stuff. The U.S. one was funny to me because it wasn't U.S. teams necessarily in the finals, but we did get to experience sort of like full on hooliganism here at the Miami Stadium. So that was fun for Americans. That was fun.
I think the one thing we don't have that I wish we had in American sports is like the singing.
Yeah.
Soccer brings the singing and the unison. It's always like, even when I'm watching, I just hear it in the background. I don't even know what's going on. I'm just fired up. I'm like, we need to get singing into college football. I don't know exactly what it feels like. It's a natural crossover. We got to get on that. We need to make that happen this year.
I know. We have the bands. The bands are always playing, but nobody sings the song. So yeah, definitely a big opportunity for us to jump into that. All right, so let's jump in. We've got about, 7 or 8 good questions. We actually got a bunch of them. We tried to, we got to keep this within 30, 40 minutes or so. So I'm going to jump in with the first one. We both can comment on this, but so first question is, at this stage in the Gen AI era, obviously we're still less than 2 years old, even though everybody feels like they're now been living with AI for a long time. Obvious sort of winners are kind of the picks and shovel companies, right? So the NVIDIAs of the world, the open AIs of the world. As you're sort of looking at the market, are you seeing other winners, other sort of winners or potential areas where we're going to see winners emerging yet in the AI space, other than basically the GPU folks and the one or two sort of well-known models?
All right. Well, in preparation for this, and we'll continue the sports, I brought some rankings, Brian. Okay. So maybe you can react to them.
This.
Okay.
I like this.
So here we go. I think winners. I put it in the definitive winner category, and I basically rank them this way. It's number one, Microsoft / OpenAI. I've just kind of made them one. They're the number one rank going into the, if we call it the fall season of AI. Two, Google Gemini. Yeah, they've had some missteps. Still, I think definitely number two. A surprise, I think a little bit. I think when we started this, I put Facebook, Meta, and Llama, just, all of that together. I'm saying they're number 3. Okay. And then number 4, you could probably debate this one. I think Anthropic, right? Those are, to me, the foundation model winners. I think, yes, there are other foundation models. Yes, people are going to work there. And I should also just note, NVIDIA is like in its own category. It's like already a Hall of Famer in AI. We just sort of like don't need to talk about that. They're killing it. So I've got those as my top 4. Then I've got 3 in the middle here that I just sort of like, I'm not going to judge them yet. Amazon, Apple, and just collectively all the systems integrators. Like Amazon's hard at work. Apple's going to be launching stuff. And the systems integrators are just building all kinds of stuff. But I'm not totally sure, like, is all that going to work? Is Apple Sync going to work? Is Amazon Sync going to work? And then my definitive losers I put in here was any venture capital that invested in any of these smaller companies that were going to be build foundation models. They've all been, if you will, hired away. Amazon just did this aqua-hiring thing of Adept.io, I think Inflection. Microsoft somehow they just hire the people, but they leave the VCs with like all the we don't really need your money or anything, so they leave them with nothing. And then the other one, Intel. I just feel like I know Pat Gelsinger would, get on here and like talk about all like, he'd give us like a 40-minute answer about how he reorganized Intel to be successful. But like, wow. I mean, just probably the biggest loser in all of that. So that's kind of how I see it shaping up. What do you think? What do you think of my rankings? Where would you critique them?
I like the rankings. I think, like you said, NVIDIA has sort of their own wing of the Hall of Fame already. It's been dedicated. I think Anthropic is interesting. They're like the real wild card in this. Who's going to buy them? Because I mean, I think you're right. They have to follow the same model as OpenAI, right? They can't go it alone. They don't have enough money to go it alone. You need a bunch of money from somebody. And if the VCs start feeling like they're holding the bag, they're probably not going to get the next big round of funding. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I feel like Amazon is the sort of logical one because they've bought a bunch of, they sort of bought a bunch of equity in them. But you never know. I mean, you could see an Oracle swoop in there with a bunch of cash. You could see an IBM. You could see and again, those are just, speculations, not insider information. Please don't trade on that or get me in trouble with it. But yeah, they seem like an interesting one. I feel like, beyond that, like you said, like there really hasn't been some other things that have kind of popped out. Like we haven't seen sort of like the definitive AI middleware. I know there's stuff like LangChain and other stuff, right? There feels like a bunch of like open source, just pieces of software, but not necessarily companies. And it'll be interesting to see if, a definitive like AI storage company emerges, or it's just the same old people, or if there's some unique new sort of AI networking that emerges, or things along that line. But yeah, no, I think your list in terms of like winners, clear winners, sort of at this point, sort of stagnant losers. I don't want to call them losers yet, because again, we're still sort of 2 years into this, but no, I think your tiering system is really good. I like the homework you've put in. You get extra credit for putting in the homework on that one.
Well, the other thing, the pitch I want to make to you on Anthropic, and I believe this would be the only slide I would have in the pitch deck for Anthropic, would just be like, we are the normal OpenAI, right? So it's like we have all the technology of OpenAI. In fact, we're a lot of the same people, but we're normal. We have a regular company. We're normal people. And you can just watch us do our work. And you're literally, your whole pitch is just like, at some point, this open AI thing is going to so implode on yourself. You're going to look around and you'll be like, you know what we need? We need a normal version. And Anthropic's like, they just raise their hand and be like, we're the normal version. We're available as soon as you're ready. We're right here. Like pull in case of fire kind of thing. That's my entire pitch. Because I think, I always worry speaking on OpenAI on a podcast, because by the time we say something else will have happened. But of course, the most recent news was Apple and Microsoft were going to join the board. They immediately said, no, psych, we're kidding. We don't want to be on the board because of some other potential antitrust issues. And then, of course, there was yet another accusation around like bad employment agreements. I mean, it's just at this point it comes out like every month, so it's just sort of like every month with OpenAI, and they really have carried the content for the podcast during the summers. I appreciate it, but at some point it may come to an end. In Anthropic, they're right there; they're just ready to go.
Yeah, the only thing, I think you're right. They are very much the, they're like the meme, like. What's the meme? It's like the guy you think you are versus the guy your girlfriend thinks they are. Right? Like they're nice, they're kind of boring, that sort of thing. But
yes, that is very well said. Yes.
All right, on to the second question. Near term or long term, do you think there would be big differentiation in the LLM models, or do they all just eventually, like right now people are fascinated with the next big one comes out, they do a demo, it's like, oh my gosh, the Google 2.1 is better than the Anthropic 1.6 or the OpenAI GPT 4.0. Like how long do you think this thing lasts, in which we're fascinated that they've added a few more billion parameters into the model? Or do we just get to a point where it's like, okay, all the 2024 models are more or less about the same, all the 2025s are about the same? Like where do you think that shakes out? Or maybe more importantly, do we just sort of split this into sort of two classes of like super models, and then like, other stuff that'll be used more general purposely?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of picking up on the last theme. I'm going to steal this from, a friend of this show that was on, Jamin Ball over, and he had this thing in this recent newsletter called the Red Queen phenomenon, which just basically means that like, just to stay even, everybody has to kind of keep sprinting. And I kind of have in this category lots of other ones like Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and NVIDIA, when it comes to foundation models, they all have some existential reason they have to be in there, right? Like you're a $3 trillion company. You can't just be like, I don't think this is going to make money, because if it did, it could literally take your company down. So all of these companies essentially have to keep sprinting ahead, building the models, making them incrementally a little bit better. But as we've kind of seen, like at this point, in credit to the people over at the venture capitalists, they put together Redpoint. They put this thing called the infrared report, where they do a really nice kind of comparison of all the different models, open source as well as the proprietary ones. And they kind of show a very linear thing. It's just what you were saying, like Chat GPT comes out with like 4.0, and then it's slightly better for a little bit. And then Anthropic comes out with Claude 3.5, and that's slightly better. And things like that. So I really think it comes down to, those are just going to be commodities, but these trillion-dollar companies have to keep doing it, because they just never know. So that just kind of leaves us to the kind of thing I'm wondering is sort of like, and Apple's sort of pioneering this a little bit, is like, well, do you just get to the point that you can, the foundation models or the models you want to run, can you just run them locally? Because I think that would be really, really interesting. Apple's leading the way because they're going to, in theory, embed these things in the next iPhone, iOS. So that'll be really interesting to see if it works. But if it does, I think that will become the pattern of where people can start to differentiate, right? It's sort of like, oh, it turns out I can embed this model inside my application and I can do something really unique and special with it. And I think that's where the area of either new innovation or differentiation will come from. And we'll all be just drafting off all the ones I mentioned before that will just continue to do this till everyone's convinced that there is nothing new to, like, I don't know, maybe that'd be 5 more years. Like, I don't even know how many billions of parameters we'll be up to then. They'll just be like, okay, we've sort of mined all the gold here. We're not going to just keep doing this. But I think it'll take a while for that to be figured out.
Yeah. I feel like the Apple thing is sort of interesting in that Apple's, and again, it's all sort of new, so people are trying to figure it out. But like, it does feel like their approach is sort of a combination of some sort of localized model. So, something small that'll fit form factor, like on an iPhone or iPad or whatever. And then it gets augmented by, okay, what you asked, I can't answer here locally on the machine. I'm going to augment that with something in the cloud, right? And essentially they've without, Apple Intelligence, without explicitly calling out, is sort of this combination of like local model plus something that looks like RAG or looks like some augmented model. And I think we'll actually start seeing companies, and this is where it'll be interesting. I think in the consumer space, where time to market is super critical, and you don't always have to be like perfectly accurate, because sometimes the screw ups actually turn into new features and stuff. I think in the enterprise space, though, you're going to start getting this bifurcation of like things that have to do with like fast changing information and slow changing information, where the slow changing stuff gets sort of trained into some sort of model, big or small, and then the fast changing stuff gets uses sort of retrieval augmented generation, sort of this offloaded or augmented thing. And those are going to start to get into some interesting sort of use cases, because it's not only sort of fast moving versus slow moving, but then you get into like, well, what if I can't use the cloud? Can I do things that are air gapped, and like, do I have to do RAG plus the cloud? Is there a third tier that I have to think about? And but yeah, I think you're right. I think for the super high end stuff, the stuff that's like replace search or do those sort of things, they're gonna live and die by the Jensen model of, I've got to have the newest stuff every 3 months. I can never be more than a month behind. And I think everything else is going to start to tier itself based on what's the actual use case versus like accuracy and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think the thing to follow there is just what you said. It's like Apple's sort of going to be the one that kind of like proves it out. We're either going to learn that these local models are like good enough, like 90% of the time, and really minimize our kind of need for like kind of like call them the mega foundation models, or we're going to learn like, oh, this is actually just annoying. It's better. I'd rather just have everything, live in the foundation model. And to your point, like, I think sometimes we kind of like overcomplicate it with RAG. It's just like, it's really just like the context windows. It's like, send all my email to this thing and then write an email like me. You know what I mean? It's like, well, if it turns out that it's actually better to just do that foundation model, we'll just be like, Apple, you're just in the way. It's like, it's like Siri, right? Siri is today. Like, you ask Siri a question and you immediately regret it. You're like, that is definitely not the answer I want. So I think it'd be good though, because Apple, of course, too, with its billions of customers, will be a great test case for all of this. So we'll know a lot more probably, December timeframe, say.
Yeah. Once it starts shipping. I know actually even my daughter's going to college, and she had to go get a new laptop, and they were trying to talk her into the to the M3 because they're like, well, this will have the built-in AI, but the other stuff will come via software. And she,
Yeah, that's
she doesn't
right.
know enough to care. And she was like, all right, I'll take this other. Like she was like the one dad said not to get, wasn't too expensive type of thing. But they're already starting to pitch that as like a main feature of the laptops, which is interesting. Whether people
Yes,
want it or
indeed.
not.
Yes. So all the parents out there, save extra money. You're gonna have to get the M3 or the M4. So there you
That's
go.
right.
And the new iPhones, of course,
And
as
the
well.
new yeah, that's a Christmas gift. Third topic. So we've talked about this a little bit, right? Like the question is basically, there's some talk that Amazon slash AWS are behind in Gen AI. You just mentioned it. They're probably number 3 in terms of the cloud providers. But in terms of cloud, they're way ahead. So, we've talked about this before. We talked about it when Adam Selipsky, got kind of replaced or decided to go spend time with his family. That might have been the impetus of why he's no longer the CEO of AWS. Obviously, AWS just did their sort of big summer event in New York City, and it was almost all generative AI. It almost feels like they've forgotten that they do all the other cloud stuff. Are you getting any sense from people that's impacting their decisions about this, or is this going to start spreading out workloads more and more? Right, like before, a lot of it was like, hey, we're doing everything on AWS or maybe AWS and Azure. Is AI going to start influencing where people do stuff, or are people going to be pretty? Do you get the sense they're going to be pretty forgiving to AWS for a while just because they haven't even figured out Gen AI yet? In terms of
Well, I
like,
think it's
who's going to be number 1 or 2? Yeah.
Yeah, I think Amazon is still the definitive number 1 in cloud, until proven otherwise.
Yeah.
I think it's like, yeah, we talk about Gen AI. It's super fun to talk about. Obviously, we've already mentioned it on the show a million times, but most of the people are, most of them have like virtual machines and are trying to figure out what to do, right? I mean, they're just I mean, there's so much work to be done on the monetization front before we even get to Gen AI, and AWS is well established in that area. Now, what I do think is, because of course I always like the narratives, right? Like what narratives are being built. And you've kind of already seen this a little bit. So we talked about the change with Selipsky, right? And then I think you covered on one of your shows as well. It's sort of like they sort of built up the new person, right? It's like, being the internal technical person, and he's going to kind of return AWS to glory. But you've also started to see a couple of these, like the turnaround narrative. So one of the stories I saw written here, I'll just read the headline, was Amazon's amazing turnaround, how Andy Jassy secretly wooed Wall Street and overhauled a bloated tech giant. So this is not just around AI, but it's sort of the like, hey, we're back, right? It's sort of like the message is like, we lived through the pandemic, we overextended Amazon. Maybe, wouldn't say it this way, but like we've made necessary changes to AWS to get it back on track. In fact, we got like the super smart, product guy running AWS. We have this great new thing called Metis is coming out, our Chat GPT killer. So I think, we've talked a lot about reinvent, but I think come reinvent, we're going to see a couple more like turnaround narratives out there. Maybe a few other executives mentioned. And I think they're all positioning that for like, okay, when Metis launches as a ChatGPT competitor, they're really going to push for like getting a lot more valuation attached to them around AI. So I think that's the whole push, because I think they're, if you will, I mean, it's crazy to say this, they're the quote unquote least valuable of all these companies, which is like, I don't know, embarrassment of riches, right? So, but I think the point that they're going to try to do is they're going to try to add, another $1 trillion of market cap around this. So I look at them and say like, I don't think they would ever say this. And I would say like, they've definitely been behind, but I think they've built the narrative, and we'll see if their Metis ChatGPT thing is good. It'll probably, people probably will take notice, and probably rightfully so. They'll say like Amazon's ready to ship, and they'll talk about how Jassy's like done all the great stuff, and they'll probably, get a huge market cap, and things will go really, really well. And if it comes out and it falls flat, well, that will obviously be another conversation as well.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be interesting. It's, obviously last year at reInvent, they talked about it somewhat. It didn't really feel like it hit. Like I said, they just did this thing, in New York a couple of weeks ago, which, felt like it got back to sort of the classic AWS stuff of like, hey, we do incremental stuff. We have 300 options for doing the same thing. So you have all the choices. I almost feel like now, like maybe they're going to get back to talking about cloud again, only if for no other reason than, if you look at the revenue that's coming in versus other stuff, they have to make sure that that foundation is stable so people don't, consider jumping. And then, then they can maybe do the thing where it's like, okay, we've been talking about Gen AI for a while. Let's show you a bunch of customers doing it to kind of reinforce the idea of like other people are talking about it. We're actually doing it. So I feel like there's going to be maybe a little more give and take than they've done the last couple of things where they've been trying to bang the Gen AI drum and maybe come back to realizing like, okay, let's not forget that we're $100 billion run rate, cloud company that could easily be 200 billion or whatever it is, without too much, heavy lifting and so forth. Next question. God, we're doing a lot. I'm going to jump into something that's not Gen AI. So we get a lot of hiring questions. We get a lot of job questions. We get a lot of questions from people that are like, hey, do you think I should take this type of job or that type of job? And those are always kind of hard for us to answer because it's, it's totally kind of person dependent, and we don't want to necessarily give you, the wrong idea and stuff. But so the question is, do you think the recent round of layoffs, right, or slowdown in hiring? And I don't really want to highlight layoffs because layoffs happen, or sometimes they get headlines and it's like, 90,000 person Microsoft laid off 1,000 people. And that's a small number. Granted, it's 1,000 people, but it does feel like there's slowdowns in hiring. Do you feel like we're going to go through some sort of period where we start to lose some of the core IT skills because people are focused on other stuff? Or do you think this is just sort of a natural ebb and flow, like we hired too many, but we're not, are you seeing people going like, I wish I could deploy more foundational stuff, but like, I don't know how to do automation, or I don't really know, like the virtualization people haven't figured out how to transfer their skills and do other things. Are you seeing any sense of like, the skills gaps are sort of getting deeper, or the backlog's getting deeper just because, we've been seeing this ebb and flow of jobs over the last 6, 9, 12 months?
A little bit. I guess I kind of think of it a slightly differently. It's like I kind of see there's Gen AI where you can get budget and hire new people, right?
Yeah.
If you want. And then there's kind of retreating to just maintaining what you have. So maybe you have, you're managing virtual machines, and maybe there's a chance to modernize that. But that kind of work and all that kind of stuff, I think, is generally starting to be deferred. It's like, hey, it would be better. Well, just the idea is like, let's keep the budget lines the same, maybe slightly take them down, but we want to really just keep doing what we're doing exactly the same. So if you were in the cloud, you're going to stay on the cloud. If you were, managing your private cloud or managing VMware, you're going to stay on VMware until such time that those cause some type of like real budgetary pressure that is like actually going to force you to do something. So I kind of see it as, kind of a holding pattern, right? So I wouldn't say necessarily skills are degrading, maybe, but skills aren't improving, if you will, where, in the past, I think kind of pre-Gen AI, we would have talked a lot about modernization, about taking advantage of all these cloud technologies and moving away from some of the traditional platforms. Now I feel like people are sort of like, well, let's just stay here because our company is investing in this other Gen AI thing. And that's where executives are focused. So if you will, let's mine the store everywhere else, which is, not necessarily bad, but it can be a little, I think, either boring depending on where you are, or a little frustrating, right? If you kind of say to yourself, it's like, oh man, I totally see what we could have done here. And in fact, if we did this project, we would actually end up saving a lot of money and really make our products or our services better. But, people are kind of told like, we just don't have time for that now, which is, I think, right. Most people probably listening to this podcast would find frustrating. Yeah, no. And I think it sort of leads to one of the other questions we were getting is like, what happens if, the Gen AI stuff doesn't hit the expectations that people have, which, is a fair question. I think it's one of those things that if you live through a few IT cycles, or if you live through a few hype cycles and so forth, like most stuff is going to, start hitting trough of disillusionment, a couple of years into it, because the first couple of years are all, this is amazing. This is going to change the world. Who's going to be the winners and losers? Kind of the rest of the questions in the mailbag. Are you getting any sense? I know we're starting to see a few articles kind of pop up. Like, are you starting to see a little bit of AI fatigue start to happen with people, or it's still so new and it's still so unknown that like you can't quite get fatigued yet for something that you don't even know when to get fatigued about? Yeah, I think fatigue is probably the right word. I think it's more just confusion. Like, what is this really good for? And I think sometimes, like, we've talked so much about AI. And I think, and there's so much confusion. There's all this talk about like agents and, LLMs and things like that. But I do think, sometimes I just kind of step back myself and think to myself, like, what do we really have? What we have is something that's like very good at, if you will, reading all of all languages, coming up with tokens, and knowing the optimal order of those tokens. So if you have a problem that's like that, like I want you to reorder the tokens, like I want you to read my email and write it better. It's like awesome. I mean, it is clearly the best technology ever for that. But when you step outside of that, right, and this is where I think everyone starts to get a little bit like concerned and frustrated. It's like when they start talking about agents, like, okay, it's going to like know where you want to go. It's going to pick out your vacation. It's going to book tickets for you. And it's sort of like this idea of like, you know, let's just say again, the LLM that's really good at organizing these tokens. It's like, I don't think the LLM is very good at like communicating with other systems. Like we know just from our lives, every IT person is like, oh, you want to automatically integrate with another system? That is very hard, right? And it's just to think that AI is going to suddenly like organize all of these things and be able to talk to them and it's all going to work. Like I welcome the day that that's possible, but just imagine just interfacing with an airline travel system or an expense reporting system. It is very difficult. Like, so I kind of say to myself, it's like that part I don't see happening anytime soon. Right. And it's like, happy to be wrong. And the other thing I would say, because I think the question was sort of like, well, you know, it's kind of like a version of this, like, what if AI takes all of our jobs? It's like, I look at it and say to myself, there is so much digital transformation like ahead. Like when you just go out on a day-to-day basis, right? And you interact with the quote unquote real world. I see this all the time when I'm paying for stuff at the doctor's office. Millions of activities could be automated, right? You know, all of these things could be automated and it's just too complicated today. You go to the doctor's office, they give you a piece of paper, right? And like you have to fill out the same piece of paper a million times. It's only one of a million different examples I could give you. And I think to myself, it's like, if AI ever got to the point it was doing all this, it would be fantastic. Think about all of the people and projects that don't get done because the people don't have the skills, they don't have the time, and it's way too costly. I'm talking about like anything from your mom and pop shop all the way up to all the things that are in your large corporation that today are not automated. Just think about everyone here's probably touched a content management system. Nothing about the content management system is good. I still go into the content management system. I upload my latest slides. It's a very cumbersome interface. I complain to myself that I'm doing it. And I think to myself, I wish AI would do that. And this is one example of many times. So to me, it's only like, if it got to the point that like AI was great at all this stuff, I think we would all spend a lot more time enabling lots of new types of digital transformation, which would be good for everybody. And I think that's going to go on for a very long time.
Yeah. It is funny. Like your example of being like, okay, I have a bunch of like crap or miserable like experiences in your life, right? Or just, you know, drags, things that you don't like doing anymore at work. It does almost lend itself to, you remember when, you know, like containers first came out and certain things started to, like, and there was that phrase called crapplications, which was like, I think you guys were talking about, I think Cote was talking about it on one of his recently. It does feel like right now we're in this sort of like crapplication stage of AI where we're like, I would like to do more of stuff that I'd like to do as opposed to work stuff. And maybe if the AI could take care of that. And that very well might be what the most popular use cases are. But unfortunately, if that's the way people are thinking about it, like, there won't be any great ROI in that, right? Like there won't be any great, you know, cost savings that somebody will roll up and some VP will get promoted for. You may end up having a lot more like happy, you know, low level, first level, second level workers because they're like, hey, it summarized my emails, it made my emails sound better. But it does feel a little bit like there's this giant gap between I did ChatGPT a couple of times, it figured out some cool stuff for me. Therefore, we're going to start putting people on, you know, different planets and stuff and all sorts of crazy stuff and crapplications, which is, you know, what the day-to-day stuff people are using it for. Like, oh, just clean up my grammar or, you know, organize a trip to Paris or whatever it might be. So we'll have to come up with like a framework for that because I feel like we could use that sort of framework in a whole lot of different ways. But it does feel like we're kind of in that.
Yeah, there is.
Stage.
I mean, there's a whole segment. I mean, it's called robotic process automation, RPA, right? That sort of like was precursor to all this. Was sort of like, hey, let's just watch what you're doing and let's sort of like emulate a user and click around and do the same things. But again, it's very, very rigid, right? And it's sort of like so I just kind of look at like just simple things of the day is like, you know, paying the check at a restaurant alike, and like some of the places now have the QR code. right? Which I think is a miracle. You scan the QR code, you pay, you can walk out, right?
Right.
And it's like, I ask, because I'm always interested. I bother the wait staff. I'm always asked, like, how often do people do this? And they're like, I don't know, like 1 out of 10, maybe, if that. And it's just like, to me, it's like, well, it's still too complicated. Like, wouldn't it just be great if, like, okay, Chat GPT or whatever, like, pay the bill, like, because there's nothing left. I mean, there's no value add in the server coming over, getting a plastic card, taking it to a terminal, running it, bringing 2 pieces of paper, you doing some mental math, leaving a tip, probably can't, it's illegible, at least to me, right? No one can write it. And it's just like, all this stuff. And it's just one of, like, I mean, there's millions of interactions like this you see every day. And it's just like, this could all be a lot better. Can AI fix all this? Great. If it can't, it probably comes back to, like, there's plenty of opportunities for us to, like, optimize lots of things we're doing. And then, of course, like, there's always, you're kind of hitting on too, there's always the unknown. Like, that's what these, kind of back to the beginning of our conversations. It's like, that's why Microsoft and Facebook and all, they're all building because they don't want, I mean, everyone's read the Innovator's Dilemma. This entire management team and all of us have read it. It's like, no one wants to be caught off guard. No one wants to be like, oh, we made fun of this technology and it spawned a great business. So, I mean, so much to the point that, like, we're all just kind of assuming it will happen. Probably. I mean, it's almost a good bet because everyone's so convinced something will spawn out of this as a $1 trillion opportunity that it's like, well, maybe nothing does come of it. It's sort of a cul-de-sac rather than, like, a highway to something else. But, you just don't know. Like, you don't, by definition, you don't know the unknown.
Yeah. As I'm thinking about that, I was thinking about, you guys, Cote, and a bunch of you are now, sort of adopting the defaults life cycle. Yeah. Right. So you just, in this case, you guys, it's like we're using Apple, whatever the defaults are for Apple, we're using that for every app, for every password manager, for every whatever. I'm wondering if we should, like, and I'll think about maybe doing this, like, spend a week and do nothing but sort of take, like, AI as the default for everything, right? Like, figure out what would your life look like if you just let AI do all the stuff for you? So, like, you're writing emails and, Gmail is sort of like suggesting to just always take it. No matter what, you just take it. You don't ever correct it. You don't leave it. You just automatically, like, for example, if you went to a restaurant, when they come out and they say, hey, are you ready to order? You go, yep, I'm going to want this. I'm going to want 20% tip on the bill. I don't even want you to come back. Here's the credit card. I'm just going to leave at some point. Start figuring out what that would look like, and then figure out, like, did that turn out good or not? And start to become the person who is like, AI is your defaults lifestyle. And maybe try that for, like, a day or 2, 3 days, a week, or something like that. And see if the progress is making any progress, or if you're like, nope, we're still at stage 1 for applications in terms of what was going on.
Yeah, I want someone else to do that and then report back. That sounds like too much work. It sounds like a lot of frustration, but that would be like a good YouTube video or something. A YouTuber should do that. This is what AI told me to do all day, and here's what happened. Maybe Mr. Beast will do that.
Yeah, Mr. Beast, or who's the other guy?
MKHBD.
Yeah, MKHBD. Yeah. Too many letters in that.
Marquise. Yeah, that would be another one that'd be good. He'd be good to do it. Yeah. I like that. I like that idea. That's a good idea for them.
All right, last question. We'll skip through a couple of these. So it's about DevOps. I know you guys talked about this a little bit here recently. So it's had a long run. There's been some obituaries written lately. Some, DevOps is on life support. Do you feel like, let's put DevOps aside, because it's been around for, I think, now 15 years. I heard somebody say they're going to, like, the 15th anniversary party or something. But do you feel like we're going to have learned any lessons from the lessons of DevOps, good, bad, or indifferent, for some of these other things that have sort of become the predecessor to that, FinOps or platform engineering or MLOps? Like, are we going to have learned anything, or are we going to be sort of starting over? Do you feel like you're seeing some foundational stuff carry over, or is it different people and therefore, they're not going to learn from the, standing on the shoulders of DevOps giants?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I wish I had an answer there. I think what I've learned, or what I think I would take away from all of this, and kind of does dovetail a little bit back to AI, is sort of like DevOps definitely sort of labeled the problem really well. It's like, hey, these two teams aren't working together and things like that. Now, the proposed solution, which was, kind of like all the running jokes, right? Like, the DevOps job or the DevOps tool, right? The idea behind it was like, you need to change your culture, right? And you need to change your culture and bring your teams together. Like, to me, the key learning is like, okay, if that is the solution, it's going to be really difficult to actually, implement, right? It's almost like, I don't know, things I would like equate it to is almost like, weight loss or nutrition across a whole population. It's like, I think at this point we know, like, this is what it means to eat healthy, but everybody knows it's very difficult to do that. And so, I mean, as we think about FinOps and we think about like every time we can acknowledge that we'd like these two teams to work together more, and we like these two teams to actually approach the problem culturally in a way that they view themselves just as one group. Like, it's a noble pursuit, but in practice, we have to acknowledge that that's very, very difficult to achieve, right? And it will probably only be achieved in a very, at least to the level of like, total satisfaction a few times. And it's going to take a pretty unique situation. So as we think about, AI going forward, it's like, wow, like, one of the phrases I kind of stole from Red Point surveys, they call it supervised automation, where it's sort of like, let me just do my work, right?
Yep.
And then let me give my work to this orchestrator thing that will just figure it all out. You know what I mean? Like, when I've done my work as the financial person, I give it to this other thing, and it so that you don't have to, if you will, have these massive cultural changes and all these meetings. Because I just think, it's just very difficult for human beings to do that. So I think going forward, that's what I would look for. I'd say, is there a way that the technology can, if you will, kind of, not require these massive culture changes? Because, again, I think, I don't want to say DevOps, it's not like it's not successful. I think it's named the problem really well. I think, I think very few companies would be like, yeah, culture's completely changed. Everything's great. We've never been working. We've never worked better together. We never want to go back to the old way. It's like, no, I don't. I think we can pretty much definitively say that's not what happened. So hopefully we learn from that. And maybe we kind of think to ourselves like, assuming culture change is a huge assumption, and I'm not sure it's achievable in every case.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm starting to kind of come to that conclusion that, there's only so much, if your requirement for the new technology to work is like 100% culture change, you should probably scale that back to like, okay, well, what happens if there's only 20% culture change? Because that's realistically probably what you're going to get. And then kind of gauge it from there, right? Like, go tweak the technology to deal with the fact that you're only going to, have 20%, 30% change or whatever. It does kill off a lot of, like DevRel talks and other sort of, event talks that, are going to talk about how you can change your culture. But no, I think you're right. I think if anything else, we're going to go back and look at DevOps and say, like, it wasn't a failure, but it was a really, really, just like we talked about the last time, like the Dell customer, the Dell employee satisfaction survey is going to be like the pinnacle of customer or employee satisfaction. I think DevOps is going to be the most documented case of like, look, technology is hard, but people are harder. And if you're basing your success on people changing, you're probably in for, a failing grade or a very low grade in terms of, expectation of success, right? There's only going to be so many Netflix, and there's only going to be so many, whatevers. So not that you shouldn't do it, but it's going to be, probably 3x, 4x, 5x harder than you think it is. And you might want to engineer technology around it versus just the people around it, because people are hard. People come and go. People have personalities and kids and all sorts of other things that get in the way of your technology goals. All right, man. With that, I'm gonna wrap it up. We've been going for a while. We always tend to go a little bit long. We didn't even talk that much about college football. We had like 45 days. Oh, one last thought. The new college football game comes out. Are you going to be playing? Are your kids going to be playing? Do you have any thoughts about that at all?
I mean, I think it's great it's out. I gotta be honest though, I didn't play it a ton before it was, maybe I was just at a point in my life where I never got heavily into it. But I like the fact that everyone's pumped up for it. I probably am like busy doing other stuff, but like, which is mostly watching college football and playing fantasy football and stuff like that. So, but it's been fun though from the technology standpoint. And talk about a rollout. Like I bet you've noticed it too. Like every single podcast and athletic site or sports site is writing about it. So it's good. It's good to have it back. It is maybe sad. The whole reasons it had to leave have all been addressed. So I'll probably check it out at some point, but I will unlikely ever be good at it. Good enough to play online where I wouldn't get crushed by a much younger person, but it'll be fun.
Yeah, that is my one fear. Like I played a little bit, early on, but haven't played in forever. Yeah, my fear is like just a 6-year-old just, taking me out to the woodshed and just laughing as he keeps scoring touchdown after touchdown on me. So, all right, man. With that, I'll wrap it up. Brandon Witchard, thank you as always. Where can folks find you on Software Defined Talk?
Yeah, they can find us if you go search in your podcast player right now, Software Defined Talk. And you'll see it, subscribe to it, and then you can go to the website, go to softwaredefinedtalk.com, and you can sign up for the Slack. You can find Aaron and Brian in there and a bunch of other people. So check it out. Love to have you as a listener.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, folks, thanks again for all the mailbag questions this week. I know we didn't get to everybody's, but some of them we answer directly when they make more sense that way. And some of them, if we ignore them, apologies. In most cases, you've asked such a broad and open-ended question that it would take us, you might be better off, kind of pumping in a chat GPT to get an answer, because we hate to sort of give generic answers to people. So anyways, with that, thank you all for listening. Hopefully you're staying cool if you're in the heat of wherever you are in the middle of the summer. But we'll be back next week, and we'll talk to you next week. Done.